Lightning Thief, Chapter 6, I Become Supreme Lord of the Bathroom, Part 1. You have 4 questions today. What is in the attic? How old is Grover? How many cabins are there? Why does Chiron not like his job sometimes? Once I got over the fact that my Latin teacher was a horse, we had a nice tour, though I was careful not to walk behind him. I'd done pooper scooper patrol in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade a few times, and I'm sorry I did not trust Chiron's back end the way I trusted his front. We passed the volleyball pit. Several of the campers nudged each other. One pointed to the Minotaur horn I was carrying. Another said, "That's him." Most of the campers were older than me. Their satyr friends were bigger than Grover, all of them trotting around in orange Camp Half-Blood t-shirts, with nothing else to cover their bare, shaggy hindquarters. I wasn't normally shy, but the way they stared at me made me uncomfortable. I felt like they were expecting me to do a flip or something. I looked back at the farmhouse. It was a lot bigger than I'd realized, 4 stories tall, sky blue with white trim, like an upscale seaside resort. I was checking out the brass eagle weather vane on top when something caught my eye, a shadow in the uppermost window of the attic gable. Something had moved the curtain, just for a second, and I got the distinct impression I was being watched. "What's up there?" I asked Chiron. He looked where I was pointing and his smile faded. "Just the attic." "Somebody lives there?" "No," he said with finality. "Not a single living thing." I got the feeling he was being truthful, but I was also sure something had moved that curtain. "Come along, Percy," Chiron said, his light-hearted tone now a little forced. "Lots to see." We walked through the strawberry fields, where campers were picking bushels of berries, while a satyr played a tune on a reed pipe. Chiron told me the camp grew a nice crop for export to New York restaurants and Mount Olympus. "It pays our expenses," he explained, "and the strawberries take almost no effort." He said Mr. D had this crazy effect on fruit-bearing plants. They just grew and grew when he was around. It worked best with wine grapes, but Mr. D was restricted from growing those, so they grew strawberries instead. I watched the satyr playing his pipe. His music was causing lines of bugs to leave the strawberry patch in every direction, like refugees fleeing a fire. I wondered if Grover could work that kind of magic with music. I wondered if he was still inside the farmhouse getting chewed out by Mr. D. "Grover won't get into too much trouble, will he?" I asked Chiron. "I mean, he was a good protector, really." Chiron sighed. He shed his tweed jacket and draped it over his horse's back like a saddle. "Grover has big dreams, Percy, perhaps bigger than are reasonable. To reach his goal, he must first demonstrate great courage by succeeding as a keeper, finding a new camper and bringing him safely to Half-Blood Hill. But he did that." "I might agree with you," Chiron said, "but it is not my place to judge. Dionysus and the Council of Cloven Elders must decide. I'm afraid they might not see his assignment as a success. After all, Grover lost you in New York. Then there's the unfortunate fate of your mother, and the fact that Grover was unconscious when you dragged him over the property line. The council might question whether this shows any courage on Grover's part." I wanted to protest. None of what happened was Grover's fault. I also felt really guilty. If I hadn't given Grover the slip at the bus station, he might not have gotten into trouble. "Well, he'll get a second chance, won't he?" Chiron winced. I'm afraid that was Grover's second chance, Percy. The council was not anxious to give him another either after what happened the first time 5 years ago. Olympus knows I advised him to wait longer before trying again. He's so small for his age. How old is he? Oh, he's 28. What? And he's in grade 6? Satyrs mature half as fast as humans, Percy. Grover has been the equivalent of a middle school student for the past 6 years. That's horrible. Quite, Chiron agreed. At any rate, Grover is a late bloomer even by satyr standards, and not yet very accomplished at woodland magic. Alas, he was anxious to pursue his dream. Perhaps now he will find some other career. Well, that's not fair, I said. What happened the first time? Was it really so bad? Chiron looked away quickly. Let's move along, shall we? I wasn't quite ready to let the subject drop. Something had occurred to me when Chiron talked about my mother's fate, as if he were intentionally avoiding the word death. The beginnings of an idea, a tiny, hopeful fire started forming in my mind. Chiron, I said, if the gods and Olympus and all that are real, yes, child, does that mean the underworld is real too? Chiron's expression darkened. Yes, child. He paused as if choosing his words carefully. There is a place where spirits go after death, but for now, until we know more, I would urge you to put that out of your mind. What do you mean, until we know more? Come on, Percy, let's see the woods. As we got closer, I realized how huge the forest was. It took up at least a quarter of the valley, with trees so thick and tall, you could imagine that nobody had ever been in there since the dawn of time. Chiron said, the woods are stocked if you care to try your luck, but go armed. Stocked with what? I asked. Armed with what? You'll see. Capture the flag is Friday. Do you have your own sword and shield? My own? No, Chiron said. I don't suppose you do. I think a size 5 will do. We'll visit the armory later. I wanted to ask what kind of summer camp had an armory. There was too much else to think about, so the tour continued. We saw the archery range, the canoeing lake, the stables, which Chiron didn't seem to like very much, the javelin range, the sing-along amphitheater, and the arena, where Chiron said they held sword and spear fights. Sword and spear fights? I asked. Cabin challenges and all that, he explained. Not lethal, usually. Oh, yes, and there's the mess hall. Chiron pointed to an outdoor pavilion framed in white Grecian columns on a hill overlooking the sea. There were a dozen stone picnic tables, no roof, no walls. What do you do when it rains? I asked. Chiron looked at me as if I'd gone a little weird. We still have to eat, don't we? I decided to drop the subject. Finally, he showed me the cabins. There were 12 of them. Nestled in the woods by the lake. They were arranged in a U, with 2 at the base and 5 on a row on each side. They were, without a doubt, the most bizarre collection of buildings I'd ever seen. Except for the fact that each had a large brass number above the door, odds on the left side and evens on the right, they looked absolutely nothing alike. Number 9 had smokestacks like a tiny factory. Number 4 had tomato vines on the walls and a roof made out of real grass. Number 7 seemed to be made out of solid gold, which gleamed so much in the sunlight it was impossible to look at. They all faced a commons area about the size of a soccer field, dotted with Greek statues, fountains, flower beds, and a couple of basketball hoops, which were much more my speed. In the center of the field was a huge stone-lined fire pit. Even though it was a warm afternoon, the hearth smoldered. A girl about 9 years old was tending the flames, poking the coals with a stick. The pair of cabins at the head of the field, numbers 1 and 2, looked like his and her mausoleums. Big white marble boxes with heavy columns in front. Cabin 1 was the biggest and bulkiest of the 12. Its polished bronze doors shimmered like a hologram, so that from different angles, lightning bolts seemed to streak across them. Cabin 2 was more graceful somehow, with slimmer columns garlanded with pomegranates and flowers. The walls were carved with images of peacocks. Zeus and Hera, I guessed? Correct, Chiron said. Their cabins look empty. Several of the cabins are, that's true. No one ever stays in 1 or 2. Okay, so each cabin had a different god, like a mascot. 12 cabins for the 12 Olympians. But why would some be empty? I stopped in front of the first cabin on the left, cabin 3. It wasn't high and mighty like cabin 1, but long and low and solid. The outer walls were of rough gray stone studded with pieces of seashell and coral, as if the slabs had been hewn straight from the bottom of the ocean floor. I peeked inside the open doorway and Chiron said, "Oh, I wouldn't do that." Before he could pull me back, I caught the salty scent of the interior, like the wind on the shore at the beach. The interior walls glowed like abalone. There were 6 empty bunk beds with silk sheets turned down. There was no sign anyone had ever slept there. The place felt so sad and lonely. I was glad when Chiron put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Come along, Percy." Most of the other cabins were crowded with campers. Number 5 was bright red, a real nasty paint job, as if the color had been splashed on with buckets and fists. The roof was lined with barbed wire. A stuffed wild boar's head hung over the doorway, and its eyes seemed to follow me. Inside I could see a bunch of mean-looking kids, both girls and boys, arm wrestling and arguing with each other while rock music blared. The loudest was a girl, maybe 13 or 14. She wore a size XXL Camp Half-Blood t-shirt under a camouflage jacket. She zeroed in on me and gave me an evil sneer. She reminded me of Nancy Boba Fett, though the camper girl was much bigger and tougher looking, and her hair was long and stringy and brown instead of red. I kept walking, trying to stay clear of Chiron's hooves. "We haven't seen any other centaurs," I observed. "No," said Chiron sadly. "My kinsmen are a wild and barbaric folk, I'm afraid. You might encounter them in the wilderness, or at major sporting events, but you won't see any here." "You said your name was Chiron. Are you really," he smiled down at me, "the Chiron from the stories? Trainer of Hercules and all that?" "Yes, Percy, I am." "But shouldn't you be dead?" Chiron paused as if the question intrigued him. "I honestly don't know about should be. The truth is I can't be dead. You see, eons ago the gods granted my wish. I could continue the work I loved. I could be a teacher of heroes as long as humanity needed me. I gained much from that wish, and I gave up much. But I'm still here, so I can only assume I'm still needed. I thought about being a teacher for 3,000 years. It wouldn't have made my top 10 things to wish for list. Doesn't it ever get boring?" "Oh no," he said, "not boring. Horribly depressing sometimes." "Why depressing?" Chiron seemed to have turned deaf again. "Oh, look," he said, "Annabeth is waiting for us."